Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Zeltzman. On behalf of the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, I would like to welcome you to this commemorative Torah study session. Today, we honor the lives lost and the people affected by the attack on 3 congregations, Dor Chadash, New Light, and Tree of Life, Or Simcha, on October 27th, 2018, the 18th of Cheshvan, 5779. Our Torah study session today is dedicated in memory of the 11 people who perished on this day 2 years ago. Please rise if you are able as we recite their names. Joyce Feinberg, Idit Baltcha Bat Abba Menachem Vehimke. Richard Gottfried, Yosef Ben Chaim. Rose Mallinger, Reisel Bat Avraham. Jerry Rabinowitz, Yehuda Ben Yechezkel Vesilma. Cecil Rosenthal, Cecil Chaim Ben Eliezer. David Rosenthal, David Ben Eliezer. Bernice Simon, Bela Rachel Bat Moshe. Sylvan Simon, Zalman Shachna Ben Menachem Mendel. Daniel Stein, Daniel Avraham Ben Baruch. Melvin Wax, Moshe Gadol Ben Yosef, and Irving Younger, Yitzchak Chaim Ben Menachem. Zichronam Livracha, may their memories be a blessing. You may be seated. I now invite Donna Kufel, President of Congregation Dor Chadash, to introduce our scholar, Rabbi Cheryl Klein.
Thank you very much. On October 28th, 2 years ago, the day after the horror that befell us, Rabbi Cheryl Klein drove across the state of Pennsylvania and walked into the East Liberty Presbyterian Church, where Dor Hadash members and friends were gathered, holding on to one another in disbelief and in bottomless grief. With clarity, tears streaming down her face, Cheryl spoke from the depth of her soul and deeply touched our souls. This is a gift that we have had the privilege of sharing for over 30 years. With strength and compassion, Rabbi Cheryl Klein has provided solace to many in our Dor Hadash community, and with her vibrant voice has raised our spirits. She has returned to Dor Hadash in her current role, partnering as rabbi to our lay-led congregation after spending 33 years as our cantor. A native Pittsburgher who grew up in the congregation, Rabbi Cheryl is a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh and was the head of the former School of Advanced Jewish Studies known as SAGIS. Rabbi Cheryl is blessed with a 42-year marriage, 4 remarkable children and their spouses, who are also remarkable, and 5 beautiful grandchildren. We are honored to have her lead us in Torah study this afternoon, the title of which is More Than Zachor, Remembrance. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Donna. I'd like to also thank Maggie Feinstein, Rabbi Amy Bardak, and Carly Parker for their organizational support in making these study sessions possible. May our everlasting efforts to remember our 11 Jewish brothers and sisters serve to elevate their souls and fill our collective spirit with hope for a better tomorrow. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, source of life, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. I want to apologize in the beginning for not necessarily looking directly at each and every one of you, but I'm multitasking on various technologies in order to be able to share my words with you today. I'm honored to offer Torah study as a way of raising the souls of our slain 11. It is my hope that as we explore the notion of Jewish memory and weave memories of them into this presentation, your hearts will be touched as mine has been from personally knowing most of the victims who I saw in shul on a regular basis for years. I am grateful that you have joined me today and continue to spiritually and emotionally support our Pittsburgh Jewish community. We may not have time today for Q&A, so I encourage you to use the chat to post your comments, thoughts, and memories. Judaism is a religion built on a foundation of memory. In his masterwork on the subject Zachor, Jewish History and Jewish Memory, the historian Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, who was the Salo Whitmire Barron Professor of Jewish History, Culture, and Society at Columbia University from 1980 to 2008, notes that the Hebrew word for remember, Zachor, is repeated nearly 200 times in the Hebrew Bible, with both Israel and God commanded to remember the Sabbath, to remember the covenant, to remember the Exodus from Egypt. As Yerushalmi suggests, one might argue that the commandment to remember has been central to the survival of the Jews in dispersion over thousands of years. How else might we explain the continuity of the Jewish people through millennia of migration, persecution, destruction, and renewal? On the Sabbath before Purim, appropriately named Shabbat Zachor, the Torah reading includes the following verses, quote, "Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. He surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers, bringing up the rear. Therefore, when God grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land that God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget, lo tishkach." The commandment to remember Amalek in Deuteronomy is in fact the second time this tale is recounted. In Exodus, God tells Moses to write a document as a reminder of his promise to wipe out Amalek. This is the first reference we have in Torah that addresses the act of memorial writing, perhaps evolving into the concept of a book of remembrance. The explicit implication here is that the act of writing and reciting, recording history and recounting it verbally, will blot out the memory of Amalek, even though every generation will be forced to confront Amalek again and again. This is such a strange irony. We're commanded to remember so as to forget. Remembrance has taken on new implications in the aftermath of the Holocaust. The commandments to remember and bear witness have been integrated into modern Jewish observances through observances like Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, and Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day. In 2013, the Pew Research Center conducted a research effort titled Portrait of Jewish Americans, and found that 73% of Jewish Americans found that remembering the Holocaust was the most essential part of Jewish identity, more than any other response associated with our Jewish past. For Pittsburgh's Jewish community, the murder of our 11 beautiful souls has impacted our lives in ways that implore us to explore that Zachor, remember, means a whole lot more. We have seen the new Amalek and the destruction that that evil force can have on our people and the ripple effects that beg the question, is anyone in the world free to live in peace and worship? Or are we always looking over our collective shoulders for the next Amalek? Avi Noam Pat, Associate Professor of Jewish History at the University of Hartford and Director of the school's Museum of Jewish Civilization, notes that Zachor, in both the context of Amalek and the Holocaust, reinforces the importance of the victim's voice and the role of the persecuted in recording their history, both during and after collective trauma. This act of remembrance has not only historical and ethical value, but it is of great psychological importance too. But remembrance in Judaism does not only refer to historical events. Zachor also serves as a reminder of God's covenant with Abraham and the Jewish people. As part of the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, the rabbis made the theme of Zichronot part of the Rosh Hashanah Torah reading, which recounts God's remembering Sarah with the birth of Isaac. On Rosh Hashanah, the blowing of the shofar connects memory and observance. Blowing the shofar is a reminder of the covenant at Mount Sinai. In the same way, on Shabbat, observance and remembrance, Shamor v'Zachor in Hebrew, becomes interconnected as one utterance in the first stanza of the Lecha Dodi prayer that we chant on Friday evening. Performance of the commandments, Shamor v'Zachor, is thus a tool of memory. Every single Shabbat is a memory of two great events in Jewish history: creation and the Exodus. What happened when the Jewish people were remembered by God and left Egypt? They became a nation, and in gaining freedom, gained control over time. History for the Jewish people is an injunction that to remember is a religious imperative that falls on everyone. It is in this internalization of historical memory that led the rabbis to say, as repeated in the Pesach Haggadah, "Bechol dor v'dor chayav adam le'arot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim," that in every generation, every person should see herself or himself as if she or he personally came out from Egypt. Zachor brings the past into the present and forward into the future. Speaking of Pesach, niece Judy Rosen recalls that growing up, her uncle Melvin Wax, Moshe Gadol ben Yosef, led the Seders and completed every single word of the Maxwell House Haggadah, despite the drifting off of all of the family members. Such was the DNA of 87-year-old Melvin Wax, retired accountant. He was a man of detail and dedication. His life revolved around family and faith. Mel was always the first one in shul in his New Light congregation. Regardless of weather conditions, Mel was always there. Friday night, Saturday morning, Sunday morning. Whether at synagogue or with his friends and family, Mel often wove, "Did you hear the one about?" into his conversation, followed by one of his trademark G-rated jokes. Mel grew up in Pittsburgh, had a passion for numbers, and used them to track statistics for his beloved Pittsburgh Pirates. His family was small, one daughter, one son-in-law, and one grandson, but they were extremely close. Judy remembers her uncle as someone who lived a good life as a good man. As former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Jonathan Sachs, and may we all pray for a healing for him, has observed, there is no sense in Judaism of the atomic individual, the self in and for itself. Instead, our identity is bound up horizontally with other individuals, our parents, spouse, children, neighbors, members of the community, fellow citizens, and fellow Jews. We are also joined vertically to those who came before us, whose story we make our own. To be a Jew is to be a link in the chain of the generations, a character in a drama that began long before we were born and will continue long after our death. Memory is essential to our identity. So Judaism insists that to be a Jew is to know that the history of our people lives on in us. The performance of memory through deeds, actions, and speech assists in the process of not forgetting. The act of writing, recording, and performing the events after they have transpired also ensures that Zachor, as performed collective memory that transcends the individual's perception of the present and binds Jews to previous generations, remains a central part of Judaism in the past, present, and future. So it has been written, and so I shall retell, as Rabbi Sachs implores us to do. To go out to lunch with Rose Mallinger, Razel Bat Avraham, her children lovingly share, was like being in an episode of Cheers. We walk in and everyone knows her name, her order, and where we'd like to sit. They would come over and talk to us while we were eating, and they would become our friends. Rose was a social butterfly, warm, friendly, kind, and loving. Everyone wanted to be her friend. She would make conversation with anyone, from people in the grocery store to those in her doctor's offices. She just loved being around others, especially her family. Rose's family meant the world to her. From babysitting her grandchildren when they were young to going out for family dinners, she would find any reason to get together. If there was a restaurant coupon in the newspaper, Rosie was offering to take whoever wanted to go out to dinner. She especially loved the holidays because we would all be together for meals. Every year, especially at the high holidays, when services were over, it took forever to get our mom out of the Tree of Life Synagogue, where she was a longtime member. She had to say hello to all of her friends that she hadn't seen since last year. She just loved kibitzing with everyone. Everyone on Furry Street knew Rose. It was her street, as she had lived there over 65 years. She welcomed neighbors soon after they moved in and made sure that she said goodbye to those who were leaving. Her porch was her perch, where she could see all that was going on her street. It was not uncommon for neighbors to join her on that porch to chat, and she loved the company. She was everyone's bubby. Rose was a wonderful cook and got great joy from making her 5 grandchildren's favorite meals. She made the best chicken soup in the pressure cooker, of course, stuffed cabbage and blintzes, among others. She was still cooking at the age of 97. At 97, Rose was sharp, funny, and oh so sweet. Anyone meeting her for the first time could not believe her age. She truly was amazing and a shining example of someone living life to the fullest. In Parsha Tetzaveh, in the book of Shemot, there's a reference to the breastplate that Aaron ceremonially wears. We are taught, quote, "And Aaron shall bear the names of the children of Israel on the breastplate of judgment upon his heart when he goes into the holy place for a memorial before God continually." The term used for memorial, the zikaron, comes from the same root as zachor. What's the particular quality of memory that dwells on one's heart? Is there a way in which we could collectively embody this consciousness in an attempt to overcome the grip of doubt and darkness that clouds our lives, that could help to constructively shape our future? Perhaps we can ask the question, 7 generations forward, what is the impact of this act on the future of my future? How do we remember our future? Perhaps the injunction to not forget, lo tishkach, as in the case of Amalek, refers to the past and memory of the mind. Zachor, remember, calls us to think about the future from the memory of the heart on which the breastplate of judgment rests. What deeds of ours were wed memory and heart? How many people have documented their feelings in a new book of remembrance since the tragic event of 18 Cheshvan, 5779? Miri Rabinowitz, wife of Dr. Jerry Rabinowitz, Yehuda ben Yechezkel Selma, known for his broad smile, bow tie fashion statements, loving medical care for his generations of patients, and dedication to congregation Dor Hadash, paints a great picture for us as she weds memory to heart of her beloved Jerry in this story. We were getting ready for a night on the town, a big band dinner dance in the terrace room at the William Penn Hotel. As Jerry was zipping me into my new party dress, I recited the Shechianu prayer. Jerry asked what I was doing. I told him that I often say at Shechianu to celebrate the people, the occasions, and the things that are special to me and bring me joy. A few minutes later, I was putting hot rollers in my hair when I hear noises in the living room. Assuming I needed to break up a cat tussle, I walk out, and you can't imagine my surprise to find Jerry with a wand in his hand, star-shaped with sparkling green glitter, wearing only his tighty-whities and black dress socks. He does a pirouette. Did you know that Jer was an accomplished figure skater? And taps a wall sculpture that we had bought at the Shadyside Arts Festival and says a single word, Shehecheyanu. Then he pirouettes over and taps our cat Maggie, the first kitty that we got as a couple, and says, Shehecheyanu. Then he pirouettes and taps a bookshelf with his cherished Chumash commentaries and says, Shehecheyanu. And then he pirouettes to me, holds me tight and says, I saved my biggest Shehecheyanu to thank God for bringing you into my life. For all of our remaining years together, whether sitting on the deck gazing at the moon, or over a nice glass of wine, or just sitting quietly reading, Jer would look to me and say, Shehecheyanu. Contemplating Jewish memory is not only a topic which interests me, but other colleagues have also given it much thought. Rabbi Tom Guthers of Congregation Beth Israel in Charlottesville, Virginia, offers the following remarks on the subject. Rabbi Guthers reminds us, like Avinoam Pat, that the classic statement of identity and memory can indeed be found in a single line in the Passover Haggadah. B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam le'arot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, a person should see him or herself as one who came out from Egypt. The memory of this slavery and this redemption is to be the touchstone of seeing ourselves, of our understanding ourselves. And the Haggadah, as it develops in the Middle Ages, in the years of crusades and expulsions and terror, even emphasizes this message by saying, Ela, shebachol dor vador, in every generation, omdim aleinu lachalotenu, there arose those who sought to destroy us, v'kadosh baruch hu, and the Holy One, matzilenu miyadam, saved us from their hands. Some Jews prefer a slightly different version of looking at Jewish identity based on a single letter difference, the letter Hey, as it appears in Moses Maimonides' text of the Haggadah, as he presents it in his Code of Jewish Law, the Mishnah Torah. In Rambam's Haggadah, the verse reads, Bechol dor v'dor chayav adam leharot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, a person must show him or herself. In every generation, a Jew must be seen by others. In every generation, a Jew must demonstrate that he or she had personally gone forth from Egypt. To show oneself as a person who has gone out of Egypt, to be seen by others as a person who has gone out of Egypt, means that our actions, and not only our thoughts, will demonstrate that we understand the mechanics of oppression and the precarious situation of minorities, what it's like to be a foreigner, an immigrant, but what we stand for and act upon, not only what we think about ourselves. When we try to understand the reason for Maimonides' version for the small addition of a single letter, the Hey, to the text, perhaps we can postulate that there are two different types of Jewish memory and identity. Lir'ot et atzmo, in the first version, to see oneself as one who went forth from Egypt, is self-referential, inward-looking memory, which ends at the boundaries of the group. Leharot et atzmo, to be seen as one who went forth from Egypt, turns the focus to how our behavior appears to others and how we engage with them. Jewish memory and identity is not only about what happened to us, though this is a part of it. Jewish memory and identity is about knowing in every generation what it feels like to be the object of hatred, misunderstanding, violence, and injustice. Memory is about retaining that sensitivity to these experiences and to be active in confronting them as an expression of our Jewish identity. How does the Torah understand this memory? Over and over again, it gives us commandments which end with the phrase, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, or words that somewhat parallel that sentiment. In Exodus chapter 23, it says, do not oppress the stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In Leviticus chapter 19, do not wrong the foreigner who lives in your midst. He shall have the rights of citizens, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then the text goes on to say, you shall have honest weights and measures. I am the Lord your God who freed you from the land of Egypt. Further on in Leviticus, in chapter 25, it declares, if your countryman falls on economic hardship, do not take advantage of his situation. Do not take interest from the poor or charge him interest for food. I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Irving Younger, Yitzchak Chaim ben Menachem, was a regular presence at shul, where he stood at the back of the chapel at his Tree of Life shul. His gentle nature and friendly demeanor welcomed the regulars as well as the stranger. He embodied the Torah's narrative to identify events of the past in order to behave in a way that demonstrates sensitivity to experiences. Throughout his life, Irving Younger always found time to spend with friends and family. He was a charismatic and outgoing man who loved to listen and cared so deeply about what was going on in other people's lives. He could constantly be found chatting with people, peppering those conversations with jokes and frequent bursts of laughter. Beyond family and friends, two other important things for Irv were his religion and his sense of community. Squirrel Hill was both his home and where he made his livelihood in real estate. He was a highly devout man whose life and character was guided by the religious principles he observed. Zikaron, memory in the Torah, is not about where we have come from, about what has been done to us. The memory of Egypt in the Torah is the most often about how we will act towards others. In Deuteronomy in chapter 24, we are reminded, when you reap the harvest of your field or the grapes of your vineyard, do not reap them all the way. Leave them for the stranger, the fatherless, the widow. Always remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Let me share with you some memories of Dr. Richard Gottfried Yosef Ben Chaim, a true appreciator of the grapes from the vine. After Richard Gottfried, a dentist, lost his father in 1992, he began saying the mourner's Kaddish. He began saying the mourner's prayer, known as the Kaddish, every day to honor his father's memory. He started attending services regularly at New Light Congregation in Squirrel Hill, where he later served as its president. In 1980, Richard married Margaret Peg Durachko, a dental school classmate and practicing Roman Catholic. They shared a genuine respect and were completely supportive of how dedicated each was to their faiths. Richard's wife, Peg, says that three of Richard's most memorable traits are gentleness, intelligence, and generosity. Together, they volunteered at Catholic Charities' free dental clinic. Since 2011, the couple worked part-time at the Squirrel Hill Medical Center's dental clinic, where they provided dental care to refugees and immigrants, many of whom had never seen a dentist. Dr. Gottfried enjoyed working out, golfing, reading, and running. He finished 28 of Pittsburgh's great races. He read regularly about wine and collected it too. He enjoyed a glass of good wine with his Shabbat dinner on Friday nights, and on special occasions, he brought wine to synagogue functions. In a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette story, Richard's wife, Peg, said, "Do not let Richard's death be in vain. Drive out evil from your own life and help another to drive it out from their own life. The only way to combat evil is with love." Let's talk a little bit more about the connection of Jewish tradition and Torah mandate of Shamor v'Zachor, the one breath phrase we sing in the Lacha Dodi, to guard and observe and remember. What does it mean to be Shomer or Shomeret Shabbat? Shomer Shabbat, or Shomeret in the feminine, is shorthand for a specific type of Jewish self-identification. It can mean in English keep, observe, or guard. Is the term loaded in such a way that it could be misleading, off-putting, or rigid? Or can we self-define it in such a way that we allow ourselves to claim it? To declare oneself as Shomer or Shomeret Shabbat is usually to associate with a wide range of behaviors and attitudes that place one on either side of a divide that sees halakha as a defining paradigm of how one should be a Jew in this world. It is not only about being observant. To be a shomeret Shabbat is to identify with a hashkafa, a worldview that has its own values, hierarchies, and norms, which deeply affect how adherents look at the world, the Jewish people, and Israel. It seems to affect deeply held beliefs and attitudes. Michael Wigier, former chief executive of the UJIA, the United Jewish Israel Appeal in the UK, challenges us to examine the ideas of shamor and zachor as not one in the same breath, but as different constructs. It is in this vein that Wigier moves away from defining himself as a shomer Jew, dominated by the dictums of halakha, and begins to develop a preference for promoting the use of zocher or zocheret for people who want to claim for themselves and explain to others a way of being a Jew that does not automatically trigger a connection to halakha or its rejection as its defining feature. The Hebrew word zachor, zayin chaf resh at its root, builds words such as memory, remember, memorial. This paradigm is deeply embedded in Jewish culture and tradition and may suit many who are deeply engaged in Jewish life, both in Israel and Jewish communities around the world, but are not halakhically observant. Wigier notes that shamor, observe, emphasizes the legalistic aspects of being a Jew as the critical way to serve God and to maintain a religious tradition. Zachor, remember, places the emphasis on sustaining ourselves as a people in all of our different expressions of identity and compels us to do what we must to ensure that we live significant Jewish lives and transmit that commitment to future generations. It shifts the focus away from the observance of halakha and onto a paradigm of Jewish living that embraces multiple aspects of identity and commitment. Much of his thinking about the Hebrew word for memory has been inspired by three sources that continue to resonate years after having encountered them. The first is Yosef Yerushalmi's masterpiece, Zachor, which I mentioned earlier in my talk, which explores the ambiguous relationship that ancient and medieval Jews had to history as a discipline. Yerushalmi contrasts historical study with memory and examines how traditionally Jews have long cultivated memory as a way of exploring their relationship with God through our festivals, prayers, and rituals. The second source is Beryl Katznelson's essay, Tradition and Revolution, written in 1935, which centers on human beings endowed with two faculties, memory and forgetting, and that we cannot live without both. Katznelson urges the Jewish community in pre-1948 Palestine not to reject all Jewish tradition in their development of the new secular Hebrew man and woman, but rather to review critically the baggage they have inherited and adapt it to their new reality. And thirdly, Wigier acknowledges the influence of his mentor, Avraham Infeld, the founder of Militz, the Center for Jewish Zionist Education, on his thinking. Infeld argues that Jews do not have history, which he too sees as a detached academic discipline. Instead, Infeld declares that, quote, we have memory which is alive, active, and implicates us in all we do, unquote. I'm not strongly suggesting adherence to halakha as a vehicle to not forgetting the Judaism which was accepted at Sinai, nor am I suggesting abandoning halakha, which for some may be tied to an archaic Jewish lifestyle. I want us to examine Judaism as a way of honoring and preserving memory while providing access to future generations to find Torah as a valuable and profound body of work that enriches our lives while we maintain the integrity of its tenets as it calls upon us to act with purpose to the mitzvot, be enriched with its wisdom, and capture its rituals with reverence and beauty. Speaking of beauty, for 62 years, Bernice, Bela Rachel Bat Moshe, and Sylvan Simon Zalman Shachna ben Menachem Mendel, who were married at a candlelit ceremony at the Tree of Life Synagogue, dedicated themselves to each other and their Judaism. Our parents did everything together as a married couple, said the Simons children in a statement following the deaths of their beloved parents. Their grandchildren recalled visits with Bubby and Zadie. They recalled Bubby singing songs like "A Bushel and a Peck" and "You Are My Sunshine" when they were young. They set an example for all as, quote, a beacon of light to shine throughout the world, which can ultimately mitigate and eliminate the hate that led to their untimely deaths, said their son, Mark Simon, in a statement to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Bernice always seemed to maintain a fully stocked fridge in the spirit of Jewish hospitality to feed all with an open heart. One family member recalled Sylvan sitting in his living room chair, watching the Pirates on TV and asking Bernice to make him a sandwich. "Make it yourself," she'd reply, to which he would say, "But you make it better." As Sylvan slowed down physically, he used a walker and required some assistance, but that never slowed him down from coming to services. Sylvan was particularly moved when, being no longer able to lift up the Torah after its reading on Shabbat due to its weight, he was provided a lighter one so that he could fulfill that high point in the service for him. Sylvan and Bernice persevered even amid the grief of losing a son to a motorcycle accident in 2010. Daughter Michelle Simon Weiss lives with the memory of her parents, Sylvan and Bernice, always calling her on her birthday to sing to her, which was followed by an enjoyable, great conversation. Michelle sadly notes, that will never happen again. Memories trigger connectedness, and Wizier's version of being a Zachor Jew is to place memory at the core of Judaism and Zionism, as well as being committed to a wide range of practices, fields of study, and ideological commitments that are both substantive and transmittable, dor lador, from generation to generation. Being a Zachor Jew seeks to promote a way of being in the Jewish world that is not dependent or denominational belonging, but does not dismiss it either. There is great merit in a ritual-based tradition, and Wizier is skeptical of versions of Judaism that entirely dismiss the importance of halakha and tradition in favor of a social justice vision that comes across as universalism enveloped with Jewish symbols. The Zachor paradigm offers a renewed model of engagement with Judaism, the Jewish people, and Israel that may help reconnect people with an approach that can invigorate people and communities. To be a Zocher or Socheret Jew is to engage with Judaism on intellectual, cultural, traditional, ethnic, communal, and national ways without being required to adhere either or reject a religious or halachic paradigm. To be a Zachor Jew is to celebrate a multifaceted identity that explains who we are and why being a Jew is so central to our lives. It calls upon one to volunteer for Jewish organizations and be active in synagogue life, particularly to hear the words of Torah, savor the rituals, and mingle with fellow congregants. The rhythms of the Jewish calendar should frame one's year, month, and week, allowing multiple opportunities to celebrate and commemorate, creating a legacy of memories and love for Yiddishkeit. It compels us to ensure that the next generation will have the tools and resources to inherit and transform Jewish life in their own time and place. Eli Rosenthal, father of Cecil Chaim ben Eliezer and David ben Eliezer, lovingly known as the boys, said that the boys created a legacy for themselves. There was no intent or personal agenda for this to be the case. The innocence of their pureness touched the world with their goodness. Diane Rosenthal, sister of the boys, shares that one of the most special family memories of her brothers, Cecil and David, was their involvement and participation in her daughter's B'nai Mitzvah back in September 2015. She recalls that, quote, the night before the service, we had a big family dinner, and the boys were so excited to be present and present the girls with their B'nai Mitzvah gifts, 2 beautiful jewelry boxes, specially selected by them personally. Cecil and David participated at the B'nai Mitzvah by opening the Ark. During the evening, Cecil greeted guests as if he were the organizer of the party, and David danced the night away with cousins and friends. They loved family and friend gatherings and love being a part of them, unquote. Michelle Rosenthal, youngest of the Rosenthal children, shares that, quote, Cecil and David's inability to read or write Hebrew was never an impediment to their spirituality, their connection to Judaism, and their love of being involved in the life of their Tree of Life synagogue. Watching how much joy David and Cecil exuded when holding the Torah in shul brought a smile to everyone's face and lit up the hearts of all who observed them. Their pure goodness taught me more life lessons than I could ever have imagined, unquote. The common thread that ties the lives of those who were massacred in Pittsburgh is Shabbat, not a denomination or an ideology. If one chooses to identify as a Shomer Jew or a Zocher Jew, what does it mean to be one with Shabbat? Abraham Joshua Heschel has written so eloquently on this subject. Heschel stated, quote, there is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. The Sabbath is the day on which we learn the art of surpassing civilization, unquote. Why are we to remember the Sabbath day? Because in the Torah it is written, quote, for in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and then rested on the 7th day. Therefore Adonai blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it, unquote. Is there a meaningful, sufficient, contemporary reason to keep the Sabbath that is more than nostalgic? There is, and it has to do with the very nature of commandedness. The Sabbath is the only Jewish holiday observance that is one of the 10 commandments. Pesach, which is the most observed of all the Jewish holidays, is not one of the 10 commandments. Neither is Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. Only Shabbat has the stature, the importance, and perhaps the eternity to be so designated. What makes the 10 commandments unique is that they are apodictic. In other words, they are incontestable absolutes. They are not suggestions or requests. They are authoritative and irrefutable. They are authoritative and irrefutable in such a way that they make for no excuses, no exceptions, and no conditions. They are eternal, eternally true, and eternally binding. This mandate is perhaps what brought our 11 precious souls to shul as regulars. They embraced this Torah mitzvah, b'chol levavcha, uv'chol nafshecha, uv'chol me'odecha, with all of their hearts, souls, and might, to remember the 7th day every week without fail, without excuse. A friendly man with a warm smile. Daniel Stein lived in Squirrel Hill, attended services at New Light Congregation, and was considered by his rabbi to be the consummate volunteer. He would do anything for anybody. Dan ran the Man's Club at Shul and was a great fundraiser. A 1969 graduate of the West Virginia Wesleyan University, Dan earned a bachelor's degree in Spanish with the hope of becoming an interpreter at the United Nations. In 1972, he married his wife Sharon at B'nai Israel, a conservative synagogue in Pittsburgh that shuttered its doors a number of years ago. The couple had 2 children, Joseph, Joe, and Lee. My dad was a simple man and did not require much, wrote his son in a Facebook post, noting that 2 of his father's great loves were his synagogue and his grandson, Henry. Sharon Stein, loving wife of Daniel Stein, Daniel Abraham ben Baruch, reminds us just how dedicated her husband was to Shabbat, Torah tradition, and living a rich Jewish life. She shares that, quote, Danny practiced his religion all of his life. It was extremely, extremely relevant. He recited his Haftarah every year and documented the event in the original book that he learned from when he was 13. My son has followed the tradition and recites his Haftarah every year. Our family will never forget what happened, but the concern of the community helps. We hear over and over how central attending Shabbat services was to the victims. But why? What makes Shabbat so important, so uncompromisable, and so essential to the moral structure of the universe? The command to remember Shabbat is immediately followed by, "Thus says Adonai, let my people go that they may serve me." We serve God, not dictators, kings, queens, prime ministers, or presidents. We serve only God, and in doing so, paradoxically, we are most free and therefore most human. We rest as God rested, because God demonstrated in Egypt, and we continue to bear witness as we recite the Kiddush over wine week in, week out, that we are not only God created, we are God liberated. Once a week, God commands us to be liberated from our work, the devices that increasingly rule our time, our thoughts, our interactions, and our discourse. What might it mean to rediscover, to redefine, and even to reimagine Shabbat as a day on which we relinquish the idolatries of the other 6 days of the week, a day on which we contemplate creation that is not ours, a day on which nothing claims us but the deepest yearnings of our hearts and souls and the loftiest aspirations of our minds and spirits, a day on which we assert and affirm our freedom from all dominance, a day on which we, as liberated human beings, rediscover our essential humanity and thereby deliver the uniquely Jewish message that only God is absolute. What a tribute this would be to our Pittsburgh 11. They got it. Their actions demonstrated the importance of reclaiming their humanity by remembering Shabbat. Zachor et HaShabbat. Joyce Feinberg, Idit Biltzibat Abba Menachem, had recently joined the board of Tree of Life, making it her mission to help revitalize the congregations whose membership is getting older. She attended services there nearly every morning, usually picking up other members along the way. "We knew she was there when we saw the news," said her daughter-in-law, Marnie Feinberg of Vienna, Virginia. "We didn't have to ask anybody." Joyce, a retired researcher at the University of Pittsburgh's LRDC, Learning, Research, and Development Center, threw herself into volunteer work following the death of her husband, Stephen E. Feinberg. She frequently opened the synagogue building, prepared food, and helped out in any way. No one asked her to do it. She just did it. Joyce had been described by a colleague as very intelligent and engaging and had a certain elegance to her demeanor that isn't always found in an academic context. She was warm, smiled easily, and seemed to make people feel at ease when they interacted. Graduate students remembered her as a surrogate mother, a warm host who welcomed them into her family's home and kept sending holiday cards for years afterwards. She had a gift of making friends and keeping them close to her. Howard Feinberg, one of Joyce's two sons, shares, quote, "Taking the concept literally, Mom had a knack for keeping track and celebrating every birthday, anniversary, etc. She would stay up late every night to send letters and later emails to friends and family all over the world on such special occasions, as well as just to say hi and to keep in touch. Part of that knack was her endless Post-it notes and reminders on index cards taped all over the house. It takes a lot of organizing to remember all those dates and people," unquote. That was Joyce. She was all about Zachor, remembering. Memory is what is left from how we position ourselves in life, who we relate to, what we are involved in, how we integrate our lives into the community, where we choose to live, why we select the friends we have, when we continue to create new experiences, how we find a platform to influence others based upon our family history and the stories we tell and retell. Memory is auditory. It is visual. It is kinetic and never stagnant, as it requires an action. The old adage of "when a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound if no one is there to witness it?" begs the question, if memory remains only in one's thoughts, is it truly a memory if no one is the recipient of the thought? Memory is more than zachor. It is more than a name. It is more than an idea. Memory is the mind's ability to recall, which leads us to react. In the mind, it's shamor. It is guarded thought. And when it is shared, it becomes zachor, an act of remembrance. When we study Torah, it is an act to honor the memories of those who laid the foundation of commitment and covenant. When we gather around the table for Pesach and tell the story of our freedom, it is an act to honor the memory of those whose struggle and fortitude challenge us to honor that covenant with integrity and interpretation. When we tell the story of those Jews who were murdered in my hometown of Pittsburgh on Shabbat, it is an act to honor their memory with the hope that we and future generations will live lives that reflect the values and beliefs that connected them to a tradition of commitment and covenant. As we remember them, we encircle their grief-stricken family members and friends with the warmth of communal sympathy and support. When Yizkor, the prayer of remembrance, is recited for these 11 precious souls, it is palpable, it is real, and it is difficult. Scholars believe that the Yizkor service was introduced into the worship service during the Crusades. The names of the martyrs who died al Kiddush Hashem, for the sanctification of God's name, were inscribed in special books known as Memorbuchen, memorial books, or Sefer Zicharon, a book of remembrance. The martyrs' names were read aloud during the Omer period, the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot, and on the Shabbat preceding Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day which commemorates several of the darkest days in Jewish history, including the destruction of the first and second temples in Jerusalem. Perhaps it is appropriate for us, the Pittsburgh Jewish community, to consider a new minhag, the recitation of the names of our 11 precious souls on Tisha B'Av, Lezikaron, as a memorial to the most tragic and evil assault on Jews in US history, in hopes of carrying their memories with us as an effort of zachor, to remember that we are strengthened to act when evil befalls us in order to continue to seek out our humanity. May we always be grateful and feel blessed for how our lives were enriched by our precious Pittsburgh 11. For as long as we live, they too will live. For now, they are part of us as we remember them. Shalom Seymour Friedman is an American-Israeli writer, thinker, and poet. I'd like to conclude with one of his poems, slightly adapted. Time does not make my memory any less painful or any less sad. Time does not change, and time will not change what I have lost and what I will always love. Time will not make me love you less, but will, I pray, diminish the pain so that I can remember you and all the time of our life together, not simply with sadness, but with a sense of blessedness and gratitude. No one in the world had a person like you, difficult in greatness, interesting in complexity, so dedicated and caring. I thank God for having given you to me. I thank God. I thank you. I will love you always. Thank you and shalom.
Thank you to Rabbi Cheryl Klein for that incredibly moving teaching today. And thank you to all the participants as well. We close with Kaddish de Rabbanan, led by Miri Rabinowitz, in memory of her husband, Jerry Rabinowitz, Zichrono Livracha. A link to the text is in the chat.
Thank you. Yitkadal v'yitkadal v'alma divrachute v'emlich malchute v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayedecho be'Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv v'yimru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevorach le'olam u'me'omaya. Yitvarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudasha Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata de'amira ran ba'alma v'imru, amen. Al Yisrael va'al Rabbanan, va'al Talmidei Hon, va'al kol Talmidei Hon, va'al kol man da'askin b'oraita, diva arata hadain, v'di b'chol atar va'atar, yehe lahonu lachon, shlama rabba, china v'chista, v'rachamin v'chayin arichin, u'zonev v'richei u'perkana, min kadam avuhun, Divishmaya v'ara v'imru, amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen.
Amen.
Os shalom v'imromav, hu ya'aseh b'rachamav shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Such an honor, Mary. Thank you.